prosecution's case against Kyle Rittenhouse in the shooting of 3 individuals in Kenosha, Wisconsin is not looking good. Now, of course, that shooting, which took place last year when he was 17 years old, resulted in 2 individuals dying, 1 individual being wounded. And the person who was shot and wounded did testify on the stand recently. His name is Gaige Grosskreutz. And he admitted on the stand that he was in fact in possession of a firearm, which he had unholstered in response to Kyle Rittenhouse because he believed that Kyle Rittenhouse was an active shooter. Now, this is an important detail in the trial because the defense claims that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense when he fired his weapon. I want to be clear that this moment between Grosskreutz and Rittenhouse happened after Rittenhouse had fatally shot Joseph Rosenbaum. That was an individual who was chasing after him into a parking lot. We covered that in more detail earlier on the show. But for now, let's focus on what happened in the aftermath following the shooting of Rosenbaum. This is where Gaige Grosskreutz is involved, and he is about to explain why he unholstered his gun in this clip. Let's watch.
Today, the jury was shown new drone video of Rittenhouse shooting and killing Joseph Rosenbaum. A crowd chased and confronted Rittenhouse as he fled that scene. Then Rittenhouse shot and killed another protester before wounding Grosskreutz. Rittenhouse claims he was acting in self-defense. His attorney questioned Grosskreutz's actions leading to the shooting.
When you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him, it wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Now, of course, in order to use the defense of self-defense in a court of law, you need to show that there was an imminent threat, right? And in this case, with Grosskreutz unholstering his weapon, you could argue, obviously, that Kyle Rittenhouse, who was on his back at the time, was dealing with an imminent threat. Now, let me give you a few more details, Cenk, before you jump in. So Grosskreutz, 27, testified that he unholstered his gun on August 25th, 2020, as he and a crowd followed Rittenhouse, who had just fatally shot Joseph Rosenbaum. Rittenhouse fell to the ground, fired twice at an unknown person, and then fatally shot Anthony Uygur. That was the second individual that he fatally shot. Grosskreutz, just feet away, put his hands in the air, videos show. He then saw Rittenhouse re-rack his weapon, a motion that loads it for gunfire. He testified, so that's what he claimed. He said this: re-racking the weapon, in my mind, meant that the defendant pulled the trigger while my hands were in the air, but the gun didn't fire. So by re-racking the weapon, I inferred the defendant wasn't accepting my surrender. On redirect, though, he clarified that he did not intentionally aim at Rittenhouse. At any point during the encounter, did you intentionally point your firearm at the defendant? Prosecutor Thomas Binger asked. No, I did not, he responded. But clearly you can see in this still shot from the video, it's a little blurry, but you can see that's Grosskreutz with the gun pointed at Kyle Rittenhouse just before Rittenhouse had shot his weapon. Cenk.
Okay, so there are 2 separate issues here. One is the actual criminal case. Does he have good defense for self-defense? The other is a moral component of the story. Who's right, who's wrong morally? So on the shooting of Grosskreutz, he's going to have a very good self-defense case, right? So I'm not positive that picture is, that you could tell from that angle that he's pointing it directly at Rittenhouse. It looks that way in the picture, but every picture is slightly misleading because of the moment that it's taken, and you can't tell which way his arm is moving and exactly which way it points. But honestly, it's irrelevant, okay? That right there is good enough, and the testimony is good enough, very likely, for Rittenhouse to get off on that charge, okay? And I would say rightfully so. Okay, but with a giant caveat that I'm gonna get to in a minute, okay? Now remember, he's the one that survived. The other 2 that died, Rosenbaum and Uygur. I know that Anna talked about it in a previous show, but looking at those videos, there's a couple things that are clear in terms of Rosenbaum. He had just gotten out of a mental health clinic, and he did rush at Rittenhouse, and he threw a plastic bag at him with things in it. right? And there was a gunshot nearby. So Rittenhouse is going to have a self-defense case there too. It doesn't mean he's going to win on that one. If somebody throws a plastic bag at you and you hear a gunshot, I don't know, a lot of people might say, yeah, that's definitely self-defense. And a lot of people would say, no, it's a plastic bag, and he had no idea whether somebody was shooting at him or not. His back was turned to Rosenbaum. He had no idea if Rosenbaum had a gun, but he shot him 4 times anyway, right? And then in terms of Huber, this one we knew all along. Huber hit him with a skateboard, and I've always thought, no, I would never murder someone for hitting me with a skateboard, right? Now, I get it, they're in the middle of a crazy situation there, and protests, etc. At the same time, Rittenhouse is the one who purposely put himself in that situation with a gun. And that's going to get to the moral case. But if I was on the jury, I'd pay a lot of attention to the Rosenbaum part and the Huber part, and I would have very much an open mind. And I would hear all of the evidence, etc., to see if that qualifies for self-defense, and it might depend on the law of the state, right? So now, having said all that, now let's go to the second part, the moral part. To me, it's as clear as it always was. There's only one fact here that's different than what I knew before, which is that today Grosskreutz said basically that the gun was pointing near Rittenhouse or at Rittenhouse, right? So there's a little tiny bit of confusion there, but it's not material. So that's new, right? And in the videos that we saw originally, it was not clear that Grosskreutz, to me at least, had a weapon. So that's all new stuff. So on for me, so that stuff is very impactful on his actual criminal trial, especially when it comes to Grosskreutz, right? On the moral issue, it is not at all impactful. The guy goes into a situation that could be volatile with a weapon. Everyone who was there with a weapon that was on the right-wing side was looking for trouble. They couldn't wait for trouble. They couldn't wait to use their weapons. Like the stores that they're theoretically guarding, they don't know anything about. They're from different states. It's not their community. And the stores are boarded up. The owners aren't there. They aren't protecting anyone. They just can't wait to shoot. That's what Rittenhouse was doing. So in terms of sympathy, do you have any sympathy for Rittenhouse? Zero. He's a terrible person who did a terrible thing. He went into the middle of that protest looking for trouble. He found it. And the minute someone threw a plastic bag at him, he started killing people. So whether he is found criminally liable for that is going to be a matter of all of the evidence in the state jurisprudence and direction that the judge gives, etc. And by the way, the judge is still wrong. He said that these guys must be called rioters, looters, and arsonists. One of them was a paramedic. There's no evidence that any of the victims were rioters or arsonists or looters. The judge is almost lying there by allowing that. So given the judge's proclivity, God, Rittenhouse looks like has an excellent chance of getting off. But it says nothing about his moral culpability, which I think he's just as guilty as he ever was.
Yeah, to me, the thing that's standing out the most about this case, not necessarily the trial of Rittenhouse, but the entire situation that unfolded that night, was the lack of trust in police authorities to do their jobs appropriately. Because the militia members who showed up armed, regardless of what you think of them, felt that they needed to be there to protect the community and to protect local businesses. I agree that showing up puts yourself in a dangerous position, and Rittenhouse as a 17-year-old, really, I mean, I get it. He previously had worked in that community, supposedly as a lifeguard. I'll take that at face value, but we are not supposed to allow vigilantes to just like rush in and carry out or enforce what they believe to be the law, right? We're supposed to rely on our police, on police authorities, law enforcement to do their jobs. But whether you're on the right or the left in this particular case, no one trusted the cops to do their jobs. I mean, you watch testimony, you watch video of these militia members, and they're just like, yeah, we just saw communities burn down and we felt like we needed to go in and control the situation. It just creates a dangerous environment. And one other thing that's also clear to me based on reporting that's come out ever since the situation transpired is that the cops like intentionally grouped, like they pushed both groups together, like in one area knowing that that could lead to an increase of violence, it could lead to a violent situation, and that's exactly what happened here.
And I'll go further than you, and I'll even disagree in a little bit here, because I blame the police almost most of all. But with a slight distinction here. I think the militia's totally guilty. I think everyone who went down there, again, I'm talking about morally, everyone who went down there with a giant weapon that was showing, etc., went down there looking for trouble. And in their ideal world, there was going to be a damsel in distress or a store owner in distress, and they were going to get to kill people. That's why they went. That's why they went. That's why they go every time, looking to kill black people, left-wingers, etc. So and the idea that the police are what, too lenient towards black people in America, it's just beyond absurd, okay? On the other hand, the police were terrible because they encouraged the militia. It's seen in the tapes over and over again. They push the protesters towards the armed militia. They thank the armed militia. They give, literally give water to the armed militia. Kyle Rittenhouse at the end tries to surrender to the police after killing 2 people, and the police don't even arrest him because they assume, oh, that's a white guy with heavy weaponry, so he must be one of us, a good guy who's looking to kill black people or protesters, etc. The fact that they didn't arrest him when he surrendered was unbelievable, and it goes to show you, but at the same time completely believable, because it goes to show you the mindset of cops in America. If you're a right winger and you shoot people, we don't really care. We won't even take you in when you're trying to surrender afterwards. We encouraged you ahead of time, and we don't hold you accountable afterwards, right? So now, guys, just it, if 10 heavily armed black guys went into the middle of a right-wing protest, cops would be on them instantly, and they would arrest all of them, they would crush them, and maybe even murder them. We all know that, you all know that. These guys walk around looking to kill people, and the cops are like, yeah, go get them. So screw the cops in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who are definitely guilty, and because of their raw right wing, go get them and do violence, I think caused the deaths of these 2 people. But I'll blame one other group. If you're on the left, don't bring guns, don't bring weapons. Okay, there were some that had brought weapons. What are you going to do?
Can I actually jump in? Can I jump in on that, Cenk? Because I do have some details on that I think are relevant as well, and it does have to do with Grosskreutz, the 3rd person who was shot that testified. You saw the video earlier. We're also learning that he was carrying, and by the way, Cenk referenced that there were paramedics there. Grosskreutz was there because he's a paramedic, and he claimed he was there to help anyone who might be injured. He had a weapon, but it wasn't licensed for concealed carry. Grosskreutz also acknowledged that he incorrectly told police last year that his firearm had fallen out of his pants that night and did not admit that he had a weapon at the time. He also said that he had only minimal information about Rittenhouse or his prior actions at the time of the shooting. And yes, he had a weapon with him for protection, but he did not have a license for concealed carry because that license had already expired. So you have 2 sides, obviously an incredibly hostile situation. You have cops that are, in my opinion, stoking the flames of that hostile situation, and both sides are armed. And it's a recipe for disaster. And then you add the Rosenbaum part of it. He was someone who was just released from a mental health institution. He was clearly not in the right frame of mind. And honestly, his behavior is what really sparked the shootings to take place, right? We have so many issues in this country, and what you had in that night was a dangerous cocktail of many of those issues simultaneously.
So I'm not trying to blame the victims here, because remember, the 2 guys who are dead, Huber and Rosenbaum, one had a skateboard, the other one had a plastic bag, okay? So Grosskreutz, who did not die, did have the weapon, but there were other people that had weapons there. If you're a left winger and you go to a protest with weapons, your chance of getting killed is about 100 times higher. If you're a black left winger and you're going in with a weapon, your chance of getting killed is about 1,000 times higher. The minute police see a black man with a weapon, they're gonna start shooting. The minute they see a white man with a weapon, they're gonna start cheering. Like, we don't know that in America already? Of course we know that, right? So don't put yourself in danger. You think you're protecting yourself? The minute you draw a weapon, you're 1,000 times more likely to die than if you didn't have a weapon in the first place, right? And so why did Grosskreutz get shot? Because he pulled out his weapon. If he hadn't pulled out his weapon, well, if he'd rushed Rittenhouse, Rittenhouse was shooting everybody anyway, right? But so he might have gotten shot anyway, but he might not have. And he certainly, if he stayed away from Rittenhouse and didn't have a weapon, he definitely wouldn't have gotten shot. So everybody has to use decent human judgment, but we've lost track of that. And a lot of people can't wait to get into fights, including with weapons. I want to read one member here because Gabby's making a great point. Gabby Marita said, even if Rittenhouse gets acquitted via technicality in this criminal trial, I hope the families of his victims, yes, they were victims, absolutely bury him in civil litigation for the remainder of his pathetic years on this planet. Now, look, the part I'm not sure I agree with is, I'm not sure that if he gets acquitted, it would be on a technicality.
Right.
It depends on all of the evidence and it depends on the state laws. Certainly the gun being pointed at him in that case, not all three, but in that case, is not a technicality at all. That would just be self-defense, right? So, but on this civil litigation point, you make a great point because in a criminal trial, guys, remember, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt that he definitely was not doing self-defense and that he shot and killed them intentionally. Well, again, some of the laws are not necessarily intentional, but the first charge he's charged with is intentional homicide, right? So, but in a civil case, you don't need to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So think about beyond a reasonable doubt to be like a 98% certainty, right? In a civil case, you just have to be 51% certain. So there, he could be held civilly responsible. And certainly if my family member was Huber, I would sue, and I would definitely think that he was civilly responsible. Okay, you get hit with a skateboard, that's bad. It doesn't mean you should murder the guy.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.